The scent of lilies hung thick in the air, mixing with the cold, bitter October wind. People spoke in hushed tones, dressed in black, their voices barely rising above the rustle of fallen leaves. The old church pews creaked under the weight of sorrow and secrets. I sat in the third row, alone. My older brother, Damien, stood in front, holding court even at our father's funeral. He wore grief like a tailored suit, just enough to look convincing, but not enough to feel real. His hand rested casually on the mahogany casket as he spoke to people I didn't recognize, telling exaggerated stories of our father's strength and success. As if he was the one who truly knew him, I kept my eyes down, fingers clenched in my lap. Our father, Richard Hale, had been a hard man, but fair. Owner of Hale and Sons Construction, he'd built more than homes. He'd built reputations, communities, and a name that echoed with respect. But in the last year of his life, cancer had stolen his strength, and with it, his voice. I was the one who sat with him in those quiet, failing hours. Not Damien, never Damien, but no one here seemed to remember that. Damien laughed loudly at one of his own stories, throwing his head back as if we weren't at a funeral. Dad always said I'd run the business one day. He told a cluster of distant cousins. He wanted a real leader, someone who could handle pressure. His eyes flicked toward me. He smirked. I didn't respond. What was the point? I'd lived in the shadows of that grin for most of my life. He was 3 years older, louder, more confident, and cruel when it counted. The golden boy with the silver tongue. I was always the quiet one, the shy one, the bookworm, even though I'd spent the last 10 years managing Dad's accounts, setting up digital systems, and streamlining operations. Damien only showed up for photo ops and company parties, but no one cared about that, not when charm was so easy to sell. After the service, I walked outside into the crisp air, grateful to escape the weight of whispers and judgments. I stood by the gravestone, watching as the casket was lowered slowly into the earth. Bit weird, you standing all the way back there. Damien's voice cut into my silence. I turned slowly. He had his arms crossed, wearing his fake sorrow-like cologne. Don't you want to say goodbye to Dad properly? I already did. I replied quietly. He raised a brow. Oh, right. You were here every day toward the end, weren't you? His tone was laced with sarcasm. Trying to earn brownie points, I said nothing. You really think that'll change anything? He continued. Come on, Ethan. We both know how this works. I've been groomed for this since I was 16. The house, the business, it's all coming to me. You'll probably get some old watch or something. Sentimental, but hey, he clapped me on the shoulder hard. At least you'll have your memories right. He walked away, laughing with his fiancée, who looked back at me with something between pity and confusion. I stood alone, staring at the freshly turned earth. Somewhere beneath it was the man I had loved, feared, resented, and forgiven. My father, and maybe Damien was right. Maybe I wasn't the obvious heir, but something in my gut twisted when he spoke, like Dad had left something unsaid. He wasn't a sentimental man. He was deliberate, calculated. If he gave Damien everything, he must have had his reasons. But if he didn't know, I thought, don't do this, don't hope. 2 days later, I received the call. Mr. Ethan Hale, said a sharp, professional voice. This is Madeline Royce, your father's estate attorney. The will reading is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 10. We request your presence at the firm's main office. I hesitated. Who else will be there? Immediate family and named beneficiaries. She said, then paused. Your brother is already aware. Of course he was. The office was cold. Polished mahogany desks, framed certificates, and the faint scent of lemon polish. Damien arrived 10 minutes late, wearing sunglasses and sipping an iced coffee. His fiancée, Brielle, followed, dressed in black like it was Fashion Week. I assume you've all read the will already, he said to the lawyer with a grin. Can't wait to see how Dad put it all together. MS. Royce raised a brow. We read the will together, Mr. Hale. I sat at the opposite end of the table, my hands folded, heart pounding louder than I cared to admit. The lawyer adjusted her glasses and opened a leather folder. This is the last will and testament of Richard Hale, dated June 14th of this year. Present are his sons, Damien and Ethan Hale. She began to read. Damien leaned back, arms behind his head, smirking, waiting, but as the minutes passed, his smile began to crack. To my eldest son, Damien Hale, MS Royce Reed, I leave my personal collection of watches and memorabilia. These represent a time in my life I once cherished, but no longer define my legacy. Damien's eyes narrowed. What the hell? MS Royce didn't stop. To my youngest son, Ethan Hale. She continued, I leave Hale and Sons Construction, the Hale family home, and full authority over the estate's assets. It is my belief that leadership is not born from volume, but from integrity. Ethan, you stood by me not when I was strong, but when I was weak. You never demanded anything, and for that, I give you everything. The room fell into silence. I sat frozen, not because I was happy, but because I didn't know what to feel. Relief, guilt, shock. All of it swirled through me like a storm. Damien stood suddenly, knocking over his chair. This is a joke. It is not, MS. Royce said calmly, Your father updated the will after a lengthy conversation with Ethan. He made his wishes very clear. No, Damien spat. You think this little loser is going to run a company? He can't even look people in the eye. I finally looked up. I looked our father in the eye every day while he was dying. That shut him up. He glared at me, jaw clenched, and then stormed out of the room. Brielle followed quickly, heels clicking like a drumbeat of retreat. MS Royce closed the folder. Mr. Hale Ethan, I will coordinate with you to begin the transfer process. I nodded slowly. Outside the law office, I stood in the sun, blinking. Somewhere inside me, a dam had broken. The pain of years of silence. The weight of being overlooked. The fear that nothing I did would ever matter. And yet he had seen me. My father, in the end, he saw me. As I walked away, I didn't smile, but I knew. This was just the beginning. The walls of the family home echoed like a cathedral, high ceilings, polished floors, the faint creak of wooden stairs. I hadn't been here in weeks, not since the night I carried Dad back to his bed when he was too weak to walk. But now I was here alone, not as a visitor, as the owner. I stood in the hallway, the keys still warm in my palm. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was loud. Every photograph on the wall seemed to whisper a memory. Every corner of the house held a ghost of a conversation we never finished. I walked past the study door. It was locked. Dad always kept it locked. Damien hated that. He'd always assumed that once the house was his, the locks would open automatically. But that wasn't the world we were living in anymore. Now, Damien's calls went unanswered, his texts unread. He had stormed out of the law office 2 days ago, and I hadn't heard a word since until this morning. At 8:07 a.m. I received the message. You think this is over. You think this was Dad's final word. I'll see you in court. I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. Not because I didn't care, but because I did. At noon, I arrived at the company office Hale and Sons Construction, still proudly displayed on the etched glass of the main entrance. I expected confusion, resistance, whispers. What I got it was worse. Indifference. A few nods from the secretaries. Some sigh, dies from the foreman. Not a single handshake. Damien had been the face of the company. Everyone had assumed he'd be the heir. Now I was just Ethan. The other son, the quiet one, even with the title of owner, even with the keys. I walked into my father's old office and closed the door behind me. The air smelled like tobacco and paper. His chair was still adjusted to his height. On the desk sat a single envelope with my name in his handwriting. Ethan, my heart stuttered. I sat down and opened it slowly. My son, if you're reading this, then my silence has finally caught up to me. And once again, I've left you to carry the burden I never had the courage to speak aloud. I know this isn't how you wanted things. You never wanted the throne. But you wore the crown anyway when I needed you most. Damien. He was my first chance at being a father. And I failed him in ways I'll never fully understand. I spoiled him because I was trying to protect him from my own regrets. But in doing so, I created a man who believed love had to be earned through dominance. You never fought for my approval. You just were. And I saw it eventually. I saw you in the hospital room. I saw you in the spreadsheets I never understood. I saw you every time you cleaned up your brother's messes without asking for credit. You were the one holding the scaffolding when I thought the roof would fall. You'll face challenges now, resentment, rumors, even betrayal. but don't let Damien drag you into the mud. Don't become a mirror of his anger. You don't need to raise your voice to lead. You just need to remember who you are. Love, Dad. I sat in that chair for what felt like hours, letter in hand, grief like iron in my lungs. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about proving that I could carry the name without becoming what broke it. The next day, the storm hit. Damien went public, an online article, interviews, social media posts. He claimed I manipulated Dad when he was too weak to think clearly, that I poisoned him against the family, that I was a schemer, a thief, an opportunist. He was always the weird one. Damien said in a local interview, Dad felt sorry for him, but come on giving him everything. That's not love, that's guilt. I watched the video once. Then again, it hurt, but not in the way he hoped. I wasn't angry, I was sad. Sad that my brother would rather torch everything our father built than accept he wasn't chosen. But I still said nothing, no retaliation, no response. Instead, I got to work. Within a week, I'd called a board meeting, showed them the updated financials I had quietly kept for the past year, presented a 5-year expansion plan I'd developed while Dad was in hospice, offered transparency, leadership, and a clear roadmap. They were stunned. One of the older board members leaned back and muttered, Your father never showed us this. He didn't have time. I said simply. The room fell quiet, and then approval, one by one. No applause, no standing ovation. Just nods of acknowledgement. It was more than I ever got before, but Damien wasn't finished. He filed a legal challenge to the will. Claimed Dad was mentally unfit when he changed it. Hired an expensive attorney. Tried to freeze the estate assets. I was advised to countersue to bury him in paperwork, but I didn't. Instead, I showed up at his door. He lived in a downtown condo, sleek, overpriced, and emotionally sterile. When he opened the door and saw me, he laughed bitterly. Come to gloat? No, I said. I came to ask why. Why what? He snapped. Why do you need to destroy this just because you didn't get it? He rolled his eyes. Because it's mine. You don't deserve it. You're just the quiet little freak who watched everything from the sidelines. I let that sink in. Let him believe it. Then I said, You're right, I did watch, and while I watched, I learned. While you performed, I listened. While you partied, I studied. While you mocked me, I earned Dad's trust. He stared at me, fists clenched. I reached into my coat and pulled out a manila envelope. These are the medical reports from Dad's last 3 visits, signed by 2 doctors. They confirmed he was of sound mind when he changed the will. I handed it to him. He didn't take it. Why are you doing this? He asked quietly. Because this is your chance to stop being bitter, I said. You can still be part of this family. You can still have a place. If you let go of the throne you were never meant to sit on. Silence. Then I turned and left. 3 days later, Damien withdrew the lawsuit. No apology, no explanation. But I didn't need one. Some battles are won not by fighting, but by refusing to become the thing you were hurt by. That evening I sat in the family home, alone. The fireplace crackled softly. I opened the study for the first time since Dad died. It smelled like leather and time. Inside, I found an old photo of me and him, taken years ago. I had no idea it existed. He kept it on his desk, not Damien's graduation picture, not a company magazine cover, just us, quiet. Ordinary, real. Fall gave way to early winter. The Hale family home sat at the end of a long gravel road, surrounded by towering oaks, their branches bare, reaching for a sky as gray as regret. I stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching mist roll over the fields where Dad used to walk when he needed to think. It had been 3 weeks since Damien withdrew the lawsuit. 3 weeks of silence, no texts, no phone calls. No unexpected visits. I should have felt relieved, triumphant even. The storm was over. The inheritance was secure. The business was mine. I had weathered my brother's fury and the court of public opinion, but instead I felt hollow. Grief is a strange companion. It shows up uninvited, sits quietly in the corners of your day, and makes you ache not for what you lost, but for what never was. I had one, but I'd also lost a brother. Maybe I never really had him. The office had changed slowly. My presence was no longer a surprise. I didn't need to justify my decisions every time I spoke. I implemented sustainable growth plans. I invested in the employees no one noticed. I opened mentorship programs and offered training to the site workers who had once just been names on a schedule. One of the senior managers stopped me in the hall one afternoon. "You're different," he said, "but good different. You're building something solid." I thanked him, but inside, I was still that kid sitting in the third row at Dad's funeral, wondering if I was ever truly seen. Then one Friday night it happened. I was in the study, going through Dad's old journals when the doorbell rang. I checked the clock, 9:14 p.m. When I opened the door, I froze. Damien stood there, hands in the pockets of a worn jacket, his hair messier than usual. He looked tired, truly tired, not the kind that sleep fixes, the kind that comes from fighting with yourself for too long. He didn't speak, neither did I. After a moment he held up a folder. "Your expansion plan," he said. I read it. I blinked. How? Bryce sent it to me, said he was impressed and thought I should see it. I waited. He looked away, then back. I would have ruined the company. I see that now. Silence again. He let out a breath. "I didn't come to fight. I'm done fighting. I needed to see the house again." I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, eyes scanning the walls, the stairs, the photos. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. When he reached the living room, he sat down on the old leather couch and looked around like he was seeing it for the first time. "This place feels smaller," he murmured. "You outgrew it." I said gently. He looked at me. "No, I ran from it." "There's a difference." I nodded. He pulled something from his coat pocket, a small box. He opened it and pushed it across the table. "Dad's silver cufflinks. I thought you had those." I said, "I did." He replied, "But I think they were always meant for you." I swallowed hard. We sat in silence for a while, brothers, no longer enemies, not quite reconciled, just existing. He leaned back and stared at the ceiling. "I was always afraid Dad loved you more," he admitted, "that he saw in you what he wanted to be, not what he was." I looked at him for a long time, then said the one thing I'd never said before. He did love you, but he also feared what you were becoming. He didn't flinch. "I know," he whispered. We sat there as the house breathed around us. No shouting, no fists, just honesty. Finally, when Damien stood to leave, he hesitated at the door. "You're a better man than me, Ethan," he said. "I just hope one day I can be someone you'd want as a brother again." "You already are," I said. "You just forgot." He nodded once and walked away. Weeks passed, the winter deepened, but something had shifted. A package arrived at the office. No return address. Inside was a set of old photos, blueprints, and journals, Dad's original designs from the early days of the company. Tucked between the pages was a note in Damien's handwriting. "Thought you'd do more with these than I ever could. Good luck, little brother. Build something bigger than both of us." And I did. By spring, Hale and Sons had opened a new community outreach program, training young people in construction trades. I named it after Dad, the Richard Hale Foundation. People came from across the county to see it. Reporters wrote stories. Old clients returned, and on the opening day, as I stood at the podium, I looked out into the crowd. Near the back, in a gray coat and dark jeans, stood Damien. He didn't wave, he didn't smile, but he was there. And that was enough. That night, I walked through the family home. The air felt warmer, lighter. I paused in the study, where Dad's portrait now hung above the desk. I traced the frame with my fingers. "We're okay now," I whispered. "I promise." I sat down, pulled out a new journal, and began to write. Not about what I lost, but what I was building, because in the end, the house wasn't just bricks and beams. It was memory, legacy, forgiveness, and I was no longer just the quiet one. I was the man who rebuilt a legacy, not with noise, but with grace.